made deal. As the big man ran at him, Hester sidestepped once more, this time leaving his foot out for the man to trip, and trip the man did, hard. His right knee slammed into the snow and mud, and he cried out in pain. As he did, Hester advanced on him from behind and to the side, preparing his arm for a swing, a deciding blow, but before he could, the man stood, his sword in hand, and parried. The man was strong, it was true, as he was large and muscled, and faster than one would have expected a man of his size to be, but Hester matched his speed, and certainly Hester thought he would outsmart the brute. As he stood, Hester stepped backwards, deflecting 2 strikes, and then ducked to avoid a third which swung past him in one heavy motion, throwing the big man off balance just a bit. Hester, seeing his opportunity, pulled out with his left hand his quarter and sliced the man's side. Ah! The man cried out in pain. The wound had been enough to make him bleed, but not enough to kill or debilitate him. Hester placed the quarter back in its sheath and twirled around his primary sword, which had no name other than the ruby blade. The big man nodded at him, noticing his wealth and his skill. "It is true," he said. "You are no peasant." "I am not," said Hester in agreement, and with narrowed brows and a sly grin. "You will die nonetheless," the man cried, lunging forward and swinging, though Hester easily outstepped him. He was breathing hard now, the big man, and as he quickly tired himself out from miss after miss, Hester smiled, all the while easily moving around the man, almost as if he were not even there. And after one more dodge, Hester threw his blade in the air, caught the handle so that the blade spanned along in the opposite direction that it normally would have, parallel to his arm. He swung and caught the big man, who was again on his knee by this point, and then in the next, slicing his throat open. The man bled out on the ground, coating the white and muddy ground in bright red. Hester looked up and around to the other men. None approached him. In fact, they seemed to fear him, so he took advantage. "My sister," he called in a deep tone, loud as he could. "You have her, and you shall return her to me." A bold move. No man moved, let alone breathed. Another man, a large man, no smaller than the man Hester had just bested, revealed himself from an entranceway to one of the towers. It was the Lord, clearly, as he was dressed in fine clothes and furs. He was a bald man with a face that had on it a permanent frown. He had no beard, but rather was clean-shaven, and his jaw protruded out in a way that made him appear stoic to Hester's eyes. Perhaps he would fight him as well. Hester grinned as he thought it. The Lord took notice, of course, and made a comment. What is it you're so happy about?" "Nothing," Hester said. "It seems I've bested your best man, however," he said, and then more seriously, a look of rage creasing his face momentarily as he pointed with his sword. "And you have my sister." The Lord chuckled. "You want her back, do you?" "She is mine, clearly," Hester said. "I am a warrior, a lord myself, should I choose it." "You are no one," said the Lord, leaning across a wooden rail that stood between he and Hester. Hester's face turned from anger to one of dismay. "Oh, yes," the Lord said, "I have heard of your desertion." Hester did his best to not show his worry, but it did show some. "Have you now?" "I have not." "You have not," spat back the Lord. You knew the moment you left the Fifth Army. Besides, it's news all around by now. We all know it." Hester breathed out heavily, looking down at the snow and mud. "Then you know who I am, and I am a dead man." "Perhaps," the Lord said, shrugging, and showing the slightest of smiles. "Perhaps not." Hester looked up to him. "What is your meaning, Lord?" The Lord smiled, walking towards the stairs on the other end of the hallway in which he stood. "You're not much for sneaking, are you?" "I do have the title," Hester jested, "but I am a man who tends to face his enemy, face to face, obviously." "Yes," said the Lord, "the silent sword you're called." He pointed at the dead man. "I can see why. You were quite quiet." Hester breathed in and cocked his head slightly to the side, but did not show any sign of emotion. "Yes, Lord, I am not a loud man." "Neither am I," said the Lord as he reached the earth below where Hester, Alep, and the other men stood. The Lord put his hands up in the air for a moment and then dropped them. "But sometimes I have to be." Hester grinned again. "Nothing wrong with being loud, Lord. It could be a nuisance, don't you agree?" he countered calmly. Hester grit his teeth through closed lips. "Yes, I suppose so, Lord." "Then you must also agree that it would be preferable that I not shout. And please stop calling me Lord. I do not see where this is going, Lord." "I'm only teasing," the Lord said, gesturing that he was merely joking by waving his hand quickly away and putting it down to the side. "What I mean to say is that you should join us, Hester." Hester looked around at the other man a moment and then back at the Lord. "And if I refuse?" "Then we won't have to kill you," he said. "The Queen will do it for us." Hester bit his upper lip in frustration. "And my brother?" "He may join us as well, of course," the Lord said, "but he must swear as you must," his louder tone returned. Hester enjoyed this lord, but he did not want to swear his life away to another army that he would later learn to despise, as he had the Fifth Army and its queen. Leaving had been an easy thing to do for it, and he did not want to have to do it over again. Hester thought, and after a few moments he had his answer. "I accept," he said, looking over to his brother. "We accept." "Good," said the lord. "We shall swear now." "What is your name, lord?" Hester all but interrupted. The lord smiled a moment, as if he were unaccustomed to it, as he likely was. "I am the Lord Ugg." "Ugg," Hester said. "I have heard of you." "Good things, I hope," said the Lord Ugg. "Terrible," Hester said, grinning. The lord's face grew solemn, but he tried to smile nonetheless and opened his mouth to speak. Before he could, there was a shout at the fortress wall. "My lord," they called. "Well, yes, what is it?" The Lord Ugg shouted angrily. "It's them," was the response. Lord Ugg knew what it meant. "The army," he said. "The Fifth has come. It is time." Hester gave a look of surprise to his brother and then at the Lord. "My lord," he said, as well. "My lord Ugg, what is it you're saying?" "The Fifth Army," the Lord Ugg returned to Hester and said. They have arrived." Hester's eyes grew wide. "You know how to defend a fortress, I presume." "I do," said the Lord Ugg, "but you will swear yourself to me before I do so." "Lord?" Hester said. "Swear," he said seriously, staring down at him. "On your sister's life." Hester grit his teeth again and breathed out angrily. "I swear." "Then you will take her," the Lord Ugg said, "and you will get her far away from this castle with yourselves. You will meet me after the battle in the town of Lucia, which stands 21 miles east of here." The Lord approached Hester and extended his hand. Hester took it and they shook. "You are now a brother of the hordeman." Silent sword. Hester's eyes grew wide as he realized the gravity of what he had just done. "Where is my sister?" he said, trying to keep his mind off of it. "In the tower there," he said, pointing at the turret out of which he had come. "Fetch her. My servant Ralphus will accompany you in the tunnel. He has heard us speak, no doubt." "There is a tunnel beneath this fortress," said Hester, somewhat surprised. "Yes," the Lord Ugg said. "You will take it and you will escape. I will not have you die here today, as I have plans for you now, Win Hester." Hester's eyes were wide as ever as he nodded and gave his thanks. "Lord," he said. He began to walk towards the tower where his sister lay. As the Lord began to command the men to prepare the defenses, as he did, he found himself accompanied by a man half his size, whose name, he said, was Ralphus. Where he'd come, Hester did not know, and he would have applauded the small man for his sneakiness, but there was no time. He had to grab Maria, that was her name, and get out fast, unless he wished to fight. And he did, but not in a fortress. He preferred the battlefield and with men behind him, but that would be for another day. They reached the door to the tower. Hester did not bother to unlock it, as Ralphus, clumsy as he was, dropped the keys to the door. He kicked the door in with his brother. Hester did, easily enough, and inside there stood his sister, huddled in a corner, unsure of what was happening. She looked clean, she looked fed, and she looked rested. "Maria," Hester said, before Maria could realize who it was. "Who are you, Lord?" she asked, a slight air of hostility escaping her words. "It's your brother." Hester walked out of the light of the doorway. "It's Hester." "And Alep," said Alep. "Alep," Maria said. Hester rolled his eyes. "You know, if it weren't for me," he was saying, but she had already run to Alep to hug him. As they embraced and spoke of Maria's well-being, Hester sheathed his sword. "We must leave now," Hester quickly interrupted. "They are coming. Ralphus," he called, turning towards the small man. "Where is the hidden exit?" "Follow me, Lord," he said. Hester had not been called Lord for some months, except by some peasants along the road to the fortress. It had been a long enough travel. He hoped that where he was heading now, 20 miles away, might be nearer the end of it, though he knew it would likely not be. He sighed a heavy sigh as Maria continued to ignore him, and then, with some rage, he grabbed a hold of Alep and said to him, "Let's go." Alep looked at him seriously. "Yes." They followed Ralphus to the secret escape way, hidden beneath the tower in which they had stayed. From there they made their way through it, lighting a torch that was standing on the wall at the beginning of the tunnel. The tunnel was well built, and its walls were completely stoned. Its floors made of poured concrete, making it easy to traverse. Hester grinned at the thought at the men who might die wherein he would escape freely, but was saddened at the thought of not fighting. What would likely happen between the Fifth and the Horsemen in this particular battle would be that there would be a standstill, many of the Fifth would die, and then they would retreat, as the Horsemen with their superior defenses would lick their wounds and hold up in their fortress. They had enough food, presumably. Hester had seen the carts therein to last them quite some time, maybe a month. The Fifth, however, would have to leave much sooner than that, perhaps a week. It was difficult to feed such a large army without hunting and trading, and they would be able to do neither so far in Hordeman territory. It was a stupid fight, Hester knew. A decision the Queen, who as of late had begun, it was said, to lose her mind, had made. She could not overtake the fortress, and she would run out of food in time before she even knew what had come upon her. He wondered if she rode with the army or if she had sent them from her high castle in Wurton, the kingdom's grand city, its capital city. Perhaps even she hadn't announced it herself, as was nowadays the customary of her. She thought herself a high queen, like the city itself, set on a high hill in the great distance, though she was not, Hester knew. He did not regard her bitterly, merely assumedly, and thought to himself that she had been born a princess and would die a queen, as he had been born the son of a lord and would die a lord, it appeared. When they had reached the end of the tunnel, Ralphus was out of breath, though he did not look of ill shape, despite his size. Hester reminded him that they must keep going on, and that if he wished to come with them, then he must keep up. Ralphus simply nodded through raspy breaths. Hester nodded back. There was the ladder. "Let's go," Hester said, grabbing hold of and climbing up the ladder. When he reached the top, he felt for the cover and pushed. It was heavy, but he removed it easily enough, pushing it to the side, along with some earth that was covering the top of it, which fell inside and on top of Hester's head. He frowned vividly. "Sorry, my lord," Ralphus said. "Forgot to mention the dirt." "Yes, Ralphus," Hester said. "You did." Ralphus said something else, but Hester did not hear it as he pulled himself out of the hole and onto the ground above. When everyone had left the tunnel, Ralphus covered the hole back up and kicked some of the dirt back on top of it, making it invisible, except that it was surrounded by snow and stood out like a sore thumb in the midst of it. But it did not matter. They were free to leave. Hester could see the battle raging in the distance, and yes, it was a sight to see. His blood boiled and thickened in excitement, and he wished more than anything to join the Fifth once more. But he knew that this place was no longer there, and he did not truly want to join them. Or was it, this place? Hester looked at his brother and sister and then at Ralphus. Quickly he drew his quarter. As he did not need a large sword for such a man, he threw Ralphus to the ground, putting the blade of the quarter against his throat. "Sorry, Lord," he said. "I didn't realize the dirt was there. I didn't think of it." Hester grinned. "Why should I not kill you and return to the Fifth?" he said. Hester, Alep said, cautioning him, though it was normally the other way around. "Quiet," Hester said. He was bloodthirsty. It was plain to see. "Please, Lord," Ralphus cried, "don't kill me." "The Queen would have you hanged," Hester, Alep said, "and I'd have to come with you, so she would hang me too. Without this man, we would not have escaped." Hester gripped his quarter in against Ralphus' throat and then leaned in. "He's right, you know," he said to Ralphus intensely with the eyes of a madman. "She would kill me." "Please, Lord," Ralphus whispered. Hester released him and stood. "Come," he said, wiping his nose with his hand and sheathing his blade. "Let us find the horses and ride."